Everyone looked at Ekel with reproach and pity, which made him lower his head in defeat, then flap his wings and leave through the window. Only Sarabi, despite not accepting Ekel's unjustified action, stood by him after he left the room. Why did you drive him away? Because he was wrong. Even if he was wrong, you shouldn't treat him that way. Did you like what he did? No, but he's still young and doesn't realize what he's doing. He needs to learn to obey my orders and not act on his own. Sarabi turned to the old man and said, bowing her head, I apologize on behalf of Ekel for what he did to you. The sage laughed again upon hearing the word grandfather. So Sarabi shouted at him, you, sage. The sage held his breath out of fear and whispered, sorry. The old man said gently, looking at her, your apology is accepted, my daughter. And you, she said, looking at Asif, you are a merciless person. Then she got up to leave the room, but Asif tried to stop her. Don't follow Ekel. He needs to know that punishment will be his reward every time he disobeys my orders, she said, heading towards the door without looking back at him. If you are a beast, don't ask others to become like you. Asif said sharply and angrily, I'm not a beast, but he was wrong. Here, she turned to him, holding the doorknob, and said, you need to decide, Asif, whether you consider him a servant or a friend. He remained silent indifferently and didn't answer, so she shouted at him, answer my question. The sage intervened fearfully, whispering, answer her question, please. I'm starting to feel afraid of this girl. A friend, Asif answered. She turned the doorknob and said before leaving, you should have listened to his explanation, even if you were confident that what he did was wrong. Sarabi left the room to search for Ekel, while the sage commented, girls naturally have minds like donkeys, but their appearances are beautiful, and that's what excuses them. It took Sarabi some effort to find Ekel. He was sitting sadly on a branch of a tall tree, like a dethroned king. I found you, she said gently, looking at him with a smile, then raised her soft, sweet, white hand towards him and said, come down. Ekel descended from the branch he was sitting on and settled on her hand. Why did you come? He whispered. She said, stroking his soft orange feathers. Because I won't leave you alone in this state. I'm a bad servant. You're not a servant, Ekel, you're our friend. No, I'm a bad servant. Asif just told me that he considers you a friend of ours, she said. In surprise and disbelief, he asked, he said that? She nodded her head, confirming, yes, he's the one who said that. I'm bad, he said sadly. I've angered my friend. Why did you attack the old man? Because he's a liar. And how did you know? Because he's a liar, he whispered. She smiled at his primitive way of speaking and said, it's okay, we'll find out the truth later. As soon as Sarabi finished her sentence, someone threw a sturdy fishing net made of strong threads and thick linen over her and Ekel. It was an easy catch, one of them said as he approached. The eyes of all the fishermen were fixed on Sarabi, as if they couldn't believe her beauty. While they were busy admiring her, Ekel managed to use his beak to create a hole in the fishing net and slipped out before anyone noticed. I'll get help. But he hadn't gone far when one of the fishermen shouted at him, hey, bird. Ekel looked back and saw they had placed a knife at Sarabi's neck. Return to your place, or we'll kill her. Don't listen to them. Go and tell Asif and the sage. The man covered her mouth with his hand and shouted, return, or we'll kill her. Then, to prove the seriousness of his threat, he pressed the knife harder against her neck until blood flowed, and said, we're not joking, bird. And so, Ekel turned in the air, giving up on informing Asif and the sage, and returned to them to ensure her safety. Sarabi spoke to him. Why did you come back? He whispered as he used his feathers to cover the small wound on her neck. Because I won't leave you alone in this state. Much of the night had passed, and Sarabi and Ekel had not yet returned from outside. Worry began to seep into Asif's heart, though he kept his fears to himself and remained seated, staring at the door, eager to return. The sage, who could read his thoughts, said, they've been gone a long time, haven't they? Asif replied arrogantly, it doesn't matter. I know you're concerned. A brief moment of silence passed between them, during which Asif tried to pretend he didn't care, until the sage said, look, they've finally returned. Really? Asif exclaimed, looking toward the door. The sage said sarcastically, having successfully set a trap for him, it seems you really don't care about them. Asif remained silent and didn't comment, while the sage said, listen, you're a fool. We both know that, but please don't be more foolish than necessary. I want you to learn not to let anger blind you from doing what's right. The caravan guards are still searching for us, and you don't know what might happen to Sarabi and Ekel outside. So let's go check on them. We'll check on them from a distance, he said as he stood up, then added, but without letting them notice us. At first, they searched around the house, and when they found no trace of them, they decided to expand their search further. They split up, each going in a different direction. After more than an hour and a half of continuous searching, they returned and met at the point where they had separated. Asif asked anxiously, "Did you find anything?" "No, I searched everywhere," the sage replied, then suggested, "Let's call out loudly. Sarabi, Ekel, can you hear us?" Asif and the sage shouted. Because of the noise they made, the villagers gathered around them, and an old man approached. "What happened? Sarabi and Ekel have disappeared." "Grandfather, that's impossible," the old man muttered worriedly and added, "Could they have left because of the misunderstanding that happened between you?" The sage dismissed that possibility. "It's impossible for them to do that. I'm afraid, grandfather, that something bad might have happened to them. Don't panic. No harm will come to any of you while you're guests in our village," the old man said, then shouted, raising both hands high, pleading for help. "Villagers, has anyone seen the girl and the bird?" One of the villagers, thin as a skeleton, with wide eyes like an owl's and the features of a man with a noose around his neck, stepped forward. "The guards," he added, fear creeping into his voice. "The caravan guards took them. I saw them capturing them under the tree." Asif and the sage looked at each other, the disaster clear on their faces. "There's no time," the sage exclaimed. "We must act quickly." The old man spoke. "Do you need help? Me and the men of the village are at your service." "Thank you. You've already done more than we hoped for, grandfather." The two set off to rescue Sarabi and Ekel, but before they crossed the boundaries of the village, a young man appeared on the road. "How easy it is to lie to you," the young man said. Asif stopped and looked at him. "What do you mean? Did you believe the old man's words?" "Yes, I trust him. No one deserves trust in these times." The sage intervened. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The young man approached them and said, "I'm a villager. My name is Jaser, and you can call me the Northerner." Asif asked defiantly, "And what do you want, Northerner?" "I want to tell you that the villagers are the ones who kidnapped the girl and the bird." Asif muttered, disbelieving. "The old man assured us that." The Northerner interrupted. "The old man is the one who ordered their kidnapping. It was hard for them to believe this news." The sage said, "Let's assume you're not lying. Why would he kidnap her? Don't tell me it's because he was captivated by Sarabi's beauty and wanted her for himself. That old man can't even use his belly drain for anything more than draining water." Then he winked and added, "You understand what I mean, of course." The Norther explained the reason. "Because they worship idols, and every month they offer sacrifices to them." Asif asked, "What does that have to do with kidnapping Sarabi and Ekel?" The sage, who seemed to be aware of such matters, answered, "Because they won't find anyone more beautiful than Sarabi or rarer than Ekel to offer to their gods." "There you go. You're starting to use your brain, you mouse." The sage muttered something no one heard, while Asif said, "And what's your interest in telling us this news? Why are you betraying your villagers?" "Because I respect reason," he continued, explaining. "I don't believe in those idols. In the end, they're just things created by the hands of my villagers, who then worship them as gods." The Northerner tried idol worship when he was younger, but one day, strong winds blew and knocked all the idols to the ground, shattering them. That's when he realized he was worshiping the wrong thing. He tried worshiping fire, but one day, while he was deep in worship, a mangy dog happened to pass by and urinated on the fire, extinguishing it. He tried worshiping the sun, but over time, he didn't like the idea of a god that sets in the sky and rises again the next day. Over time, he stopped his attempts and began contemplating nature, trying to find, using only his mind, the God who created everything around him. The Northerner believed deep down that he didn't come to Earth by chance, and that he wasn't created in this world for no reason. "You must act quickly if you want to save the girl and the bird." He was about the same age as Asif, with the features of a vagabond, sleepy eyes, and a patchy beard with light green hairs. He wore short, wide white clothes and carried a long sword on his back, resembling a samurai sword, with a black and gold handle. Asif said, "I'll trust you." "Don't trust me," the Northerner said, then added, "In these times, no one deserves trust." The sage interrupted their dramatic conversation. "Trust me, or both Ekel and Sarabi will die while you two talk about trust. You fools." When they arrived at the outskirts of the village, the place where, according to the Northerner, the villagers were supposed to erect their deities, they witnessed a strange scene. All the villagers were gathered around a large fire. Some were beating their chests with their hands, others were striking themselves with iron chains, and some were circling a massive idol standing in the center of the square. "Look over there," said the sage, pointing to a specific spot. The two looked in the direction the sage indicated and were horrified by what they saw. An elderly man was sharpening his sword with a rough piece of iron to make its blade razor sharp. Sarabi was kneeling near his feet, her hands tied behind her back and her eyes blindfolded with a cloth. Nearby, just a few steps away, they saw a crown trapped inside a cage. The old man raised the sword with both hands, ready to behead her. "We're late," said the Northerner, gripping the hilt of his sword. "I'll do what needs to be done," Asif whispered to himself, his left eye gradually turning a deep red. Then, suddenly, he dashed toward the spot where the old man stood with a speed akin to sound cutting through the void. "What is this?" the northerner exclaimed, astonished by Asif's speed. "That's Asif," the sage said confidently.